Hello, and welcome to Next Generation Teaching, Episode 14, based around retrieval practice. In this series so far, we've been looking at how AI can genuinely support your professional practice in the classroom. In most episodes, we've been working with the general population of learners, but today we're doing something different. Today we're being specific about the learners who are most often left behind when strategies are applied without adaptation. This episode is about retrieval practice for SEND and EAL learners, and I want to be clear from the outset about what that means. It does not mean making these things easier, and it doesn't mean lowering expectations. It means designing retrieval tasks that actually work for the learners in front of you, removing the barriers that prevent access without removing the cognitive work that produces learning. By the end of this episode, you will have the research, the ethical framework, 5 strategies for SEND learners, 5 strategies for EAL learners, 6 copy-ready AI prompts, and a clear plan for incorporating this into your practice. So let's begin. So before we get into the content, let me quickly map what we're going to cover because this episode has a lot in it and I want you to be able to navigate back to sections you need. Firstly, we start with the research, both what the evidence says retrieval practice can do for SEND and EAL learners, and the important caveats about where the evidence base does have gaps. Then we look at the barriers, why standard retrieval practice can inadvertently exclude or frustrate learners who are SEND or EAL, even when the strategy itself is sound. Then we get practical, ethical AI use specifically for these contexts. And I want to flag early that the ethical stakes here are higher than in general AI use. We will look at 5 specific AI strategies for SEND learners, 5 for EAL learners, and then the 6 copy-ready prompts that you can take away with today. We finish with planning integration and your challenge this week. Every section builds on the one before, so I'd encourage you to watch in sequence first time through and then go back to any areas that you want to quickly recap. So let me start with some numbers because they set the context for everything that follows. According to the Department for Education in 2023, around 17% of pupils in England have identified SEND. 19% have English as an additional language. And when you put those numbers together and acknowledge that there is significant overlap between the two groups, you're looking at a meaningful proportion of every class in every school in the country. And here is the evidence gap that motivated this episode. Most of the research that underpins retrieval practice as a strategy was conducted with neurotypical, fluent English student populations. When Agarwal and colleagues reviewed the retrieval practice literature in 2021, it became clear that research samples overwhelmingly came from mainstream general education populations, with SEND learners rarely represented. This creates a real professional problem. We have strong evidence that retrieval practice works, but we have much weaker evidence about how to make it work for learners who face barriers to standard retrieval formats. That is the gap that this episode is designed to help you close. The key message from this slide is this: a strategy rated high utility for the general population can unintentionally exclude, frustrate, or disadvantage SEND and EAL learners if applied without thought. A blank page recall task is not equally accessible to all learners. A timed retrieval quiz is not equally fair. Our job is to make retrieval work for everyone and not just most people. So let's look at what the research actually tells us about retrieval practice and SEND learners. And I want to give you both sides of this, the positive findings as well as the important caveats, because both matter for your practice. So firstly, let's look at the positive findings. Agarwal and colleagues' review suggests that retrieval practice benefit extends across learner populations, including learners with disabilities, when tasks are appropriately scaffolded. The test and effect is robust across cognitive profiles, but the format through which it is delivered must match the learner's profile. The Education Endowment Foundation's 2021 guidance on SEND in mainstream schools rates metacognitive strategies, including self-testing, amongst the highest evidence approaches for SEND learners, with an average effect size equivalent to 7 months of additional progress. That is substantial. But the EEF is equally clear that the approach must be taught explicitly and adapted to the learner. Gafferco and colleagues' work on working memory is particularly relevant here. Their research shows that retrieval design informed by working memory research, shorter chunks, visual scaffolds, reduced cognitive load, significantly improves outcomes for learners with working memory difficulties, and this is directly actionable. Now for the caveats, and please do not skip these. Standard retrieval formats such as blank page recall, timed tests can trigger anxiety and working memory overload in learners with dyslexia, ADHD, autism, and anxiety disorders. Sweller's cognitive load theory tells us that when the format of a task creates excessive cognitive load, it competes with the retrieval itself. You end up testing the learner's ability to manage the format rather than their knowledge. And perhaps most importantly, no single adaptation works for all SEND learners. Profiles vary enormously. An adaptation that supports a learner with dyslexia may be entirely inappropriate for a learner with autism. AI must always be prompted with specific needs and not general labels. Now on to the EAL evidence base, which is somewhat stronger, more specific than the SEND evidence, partly because language acquisition research has a longer tradition of including diverse language groups. So what the evidence supports. Paul Nation's seminal work on vocabulary learning established that multiple, spaced encounters with target vocabulary in varied contexts are essential for effective EAL vocabulary development. This is retrieval practice applied to vocabulary, and it's one of the highest evidence-based interventions available for EAL learners. Jim Cummins' BICS and CALP framework is essential background here. BICS, standing for Basic Interpersonal Communicative Skills, is conversational fluency. CALP, Cognitive Academic Language Proficiency, is the academic language of the classroom. An EAL learner can have confident BICS and still be significantly underdeveloped in CALP. Many retrieval tasks test CALP by accident. They require academic language to express knowledge that the student actually has. This is a design problem and not a learner problem. The EEF's 2018 guidance on supporting EAL learners found that structured retrieval with sentence frames, word banks, and visual supports significantly improves academic language acquisition. These are not crutches, they are scaffolds that allow knowledge to be demonstrated whilst language is still being developed. The design principles that follow from this evidence are clear. Reduce the language load in the retrieval prompt itself. The task should test content knowledge, not the ability to decode complex English instructions. Provide sentence starters and word banks. Use bilingual glossaries and allow mother tongue cues. Cummins' research is very clear that this supports retrieval for bilingual learners rather than undermining it. And fundamentally, distinguish between what a learner knows and what they can express in English. Low English proficiency does not mean low knowledge. Our retrieval task must give learners the means to demonstrate what they know, not penalise them for the language that they are still developing. Before we look at strategies, we need to look at barriers, because if you don't understand what's making standard retrieval practice inaccessible, you can't design adaptations that actually address the right problem. Dyslexia. Written retrieval places high demand on phonological processing. Spelling accuracy can trigger anxiety that blocks recall, and learners may experience working memory overload from reading and answering at the same time. These are format barriers, but not knowledge barriers. Autism spectrum. Open-ended prompts can create anxiety because there's no clear success criteria. Unexpected formats, for example, a retrieval quiz that looks different from last week, can be destabilizing. This is not avoidance, it's a genuine response to uncertainty that needs to be designed out. ADHD. Sustained attention over a self-testing session often exceeds typical session capacity. Timed formats heighten arousal at the wrong time. Blank page retrieval lacks the external structure needed to initiate the task. These are initiation and attention barriers and not motivation barriers. Anxiety and mental health needs. Belock and Ramirez research is very clear. Test-like formats trigger threat responses that impair working memory. Students who experience evaluation anxiety are being tested on their anxiety management as much as their knowledge. This is an entirely solvable design problem. Early stage EAL. The language demands of the retrieval prompt itself obscure content knowledge. An early stage EAL learner may not be able to decode the question and therefore cannot retrieve the answer, regardless of whether they know it or not. Intermediate EAL. The CALP gap. Academic vocabulary is still being developed, so retrieval tasks that require subject-specific language can penalise the learner for the gap between their knowledge and their current language proficiency. Understanding which barrier is at play for which learner is the starting point for every AI prompt you use in this context. The more precisely you can name the barrier, the more useful the AI-generated adaptation will be. Before we go any further or look at any strategies or prompts, I need to spend some time on the ethical framework. And I want to be direct because the ethical stakes in this episode are higher than in any other episode in this series. SEND and EAL learners are amongst the most vulnerable students in our school. Getting this wrong has real consequences for real children. Principle 1. EHCP, SENCO and TA first. Always, always, always consult the EHCP, your SENCO and any supporting teaching assistants before using AI-generated adaptations. The EHCP is a legal document that describes a specific child's specific needs. AI has no access to it, no knowledge of it, and no capacity to account for it, but your school colleagues do. Principal tool is there's to be no individual data in AI tools. This is a legal requirement under GDPR, not a professional preference. Never enter a student's name, their diagnosis, their EHCP content, their assessment grades, or anything that identifies them into a public AI tool. Describe needs in a general terms. A student with working memory difficulties is appropriate. Jamie Smith in 9B, who has a diagnosis of dyslexia, for example, is not. Principle 3. Adaptation is not the same as simplification. This is perhaps the most common error when using AI for SEND and EAL adaptations. AI may default to reducing content demand rather than reducing the language or format barrier. Before you use any AI-generated adaptation, ask, have I reduced the right barrier? The cognitive demand of retrieval should be preserved. The format barrier is what we're removing. Principle 4 is every output must be reviewed. AI cannot know your learners. It drafts and you review. You do not deploy unreviewed AI output with SEND learners ever. The review must be against your specific knowledge of that student, not a general sense that it looks reasonable. Principle 5 is transparency. If you use AI to generate SEND adaptations, be transparent about this with your SENCO and, if relevant, with parents. AI-assisted planning is entirely acceptable and increasingly common. AI-generated EHCP provision that is undisclosed is not. And Principle 6 is cultural and linguistic sensitivity. AI tools do carry inherent biases. They are predominantly trained on English language, Western-centric content. For EAL learners, you need to check that examples, names, and contexts in AI-generated retrieval tasks are culturally inclusive and do not assume a frame of reference that excludes your learners. Now the practical strategies. We're going to move through 5 AI-supported approaches for SEND learners, and I want to connect each one explicitly to the research. Strategy 1 is trunk and scaffold. Instead of asking AI to generate a standard retrieval question, ask it to break the question into 3 or 4 smaller prompts, stepped prompts. Name 1 cause, add 1 detail, connect 2 causes. This directly reduces working memory load. Gathercole's research on working memory capacity is clear about this. While preserving the retrieval demand at each step, you are not making the question easier, you are making the pathway through it manageable. Strategy 2. Reduce format barriers. Ask AI to reformat the same retrieval content into multiple formats simultaneously. Close, matching, visual labeling, oral prompts. One question, 4 entry points. This is particularly powerful because it does not require you to know in advance which format suits which learner. The learner can choose, or you can assign based on your knowledge of the group. Strategy 3. Dual coding retrieval. Ask AI to create retrieval tasks that combine a visual element with the recall prompt. A concept map skeleton, a labeled diagram, a timeline with gaps. For learners with dyslexia, this reduces phonological processing demands whilst maintaining retrieval effort. Pavio's dual coding research tells us that processing through both verbal and visual channels produces stronger memory, and for many SEND learners, this visual channel is often less compromised. Strategy 4. Metacognitive scaffolding. Ask AI to generate a think aloud retrieval protocol, a structured set of steps the learner follows. Reads the question, say what you know without looking, then check. The EEF rates metacognitive approaches amongst the highest evidence interventions for SEND learners. The protocol makes the metacognitive process explicit for learners who find self-regulation difficult. And strategy 5. Low stakes oral retrieval. For learners with whom written retrieval is a significant barrier, ask AI to generate question sets designed for verbal response with TA prompts included. The retrieval effect does not require written expression. Speaking your answer from memory is retrieval practice. This approach preserves the learning mechanism whilst removing the barrier. Now, 5 strategies specifically for EAL learners. These are grounded in the language acquisition research we covered earlier, particularly Cummins, Nation, and the EEF guidance. Strategy 1 is vocabulary retrieval first. Ask AI to generate a vocabulary retrieval task before the content retrieval task. Nation's research on vocabulary learning is clear. EAL learners often have the content knowledge, but may lack the target vocabulary to express it. Priming vocabulary in the first few minutes of a starter unlocks the content retrieval that follows. The vocabulary task is not the main event, it's the key that opens the door. Strategy 2 is sentence frame retrieval. Ask AI to create retrieval prompts with sentence frame scaffolds. The main call was because. The evidence for this is these frames reduce the language production demand whilst preserving the retrieval of content knowledge. The EEF's 2018 EAL guidance specifically endorses this approach. Strategy 3 is bilingual cue cards. Ask AI to generate key term glossaries with simple English definitions and a column for the learner to add their home language translation. Cummins' 2001 research on cross-linguistic transfer is explicit. Mother tongue cues support retrieval for bilingual learners. This is not a concession, it's a research-endorsed scaffold. Strategy 4 is tiered retrieval sets. Ask AI to produce the same level retrieval questions at 3 language levels. Basic, simple vocabulary, short answer. Developing is subject vocabulary required and structured responses. Secure is full academic language, extended response. All 3 tiers test the same content knowledge. The differentiation is in language demand and not is in what is being retrieved. Strategy 5 is visual verbal parallel tasks. Ask AI to pair each retrieval question with a visual stimulus, a diagram, an image, a description, a timeline that carries the meaning non-linguistically. The learner retrieves knowledge using the visual, then expresses it at their language level. This is dual coding applied specifically to the EAL context. Now the prompts. These are copy ready. Replace every piece of text in square brackets with your specific context. And I want to emphasize one thing before we go through them. The quality of what AI produces is directly related to how specific the information is that you provide. Generic prompts produce generic outputs. Specific prompts produce useful ones. Prompt 1 is about chunking and scaffolding a retrieval task. Notice when you read the prompt, the critical instruction at the end. Do not reduce cognitive demand, only the format barrier. That instruction is the ethical core of the prompt. Without it, AI will often just make the task easier. Now we have prompt 2 for multi-format retrieval set. And again, when you read through this and type it out, please make sure that you're specific to your context. And thirdly, you can see prompt 3, which is low stakes oral retrieval protocol. This will generate a complete TA supported oral retrieval session, question, TA prompt if stuck, success indicator, and a learner self-rating. Review this with your TA though before the lesson and not during it. So please feel free to take a screenshot or a photo of the prompts for you to use in future lessons. Again, please feel free to take a screenshot or a photo of these 3 prompts focused on EAL. So prompt 4 is about tiered EAL retrieval questions, and it's the most immediately usable prompt in this episode for teachers with mixed EAL classrooms. So as you read through this prompt, please make sure that you understand that all 3 levels should test the same content knowledge. You're tiering language demand and not content demand. Make sure that if you use this prompt, you review the output to make sure that AI has done it correctly. It sometimes reduces content as well as language. Prompt 5 is vocabulary retrieval and sentence frames. Ask AI to generate a vocabulary retrieval list, simple definitions, a home language column, and 3 retrieval questions with sentence frame scaffolds all in one prompt. And prompt 6 is bilingual cue card generator. This creates a 2-column A5 card with key terms, simple definitions, visual cues, and a space for the learner to add home language translations. Build these at the start of a unit and students add to them across the term. By the end of the unit, they should have a personalised bilingual retrieval tool that is itself a form of space practice. One concern you often hear when this topic comes up is, I can't make a different resource for every lesson. I don't have time. And the answer is you don't need to. The approach I'm going to describe does not require 30 different worksheets. It requires one well-designed task with multiple entry points. So, at lesson level, use prompt 2, the multi-format prompt, to create one retrieval task with 4 entry points, not 4 separate resources. One resource accessed differently. Build in an oral retrieval if you can for every written starter, and brief your TA in advance using prompt 3 output. Although I know that given the timings of TA and the workload of teachers, this is not always able to happen. For EAL learners, 5 minutes of vocabulary retrieval before the content retrieval makes the content task accessible. At medium term level, use prompt 1 at the start of each unit to generate a scaffold retrieval sequence for your SEND learners. Build bilingual cue cards using prompt 6 at the beginning of the unit and grow them over the half term. Review AI generated adaptations with your SENCO or with your EAL coordinator at the start of the unit, not after you've already started to use them. And at long term and whole school level, audit your existing retrieval starter bank. Which tasks unintentionally exclude? Apply a multi-format redesign systematically. Create a shared prompt bank for your department using the 6 prompts from this episode. Establish a SENCO review protocol for AI-generated adaptations and use the bilingual glossary bank as a shared resource across the year and not just for individual teachers. The point I want to make is that this does not need to feel like additional work on top of existing planning. The multi-format approach produces resources that work for all learners, not separate resources for SEND and EAL students. The adaptation is built in from the start. So now let's go through an error checking AI output for SEND and EAL context checklist. This isn't an optional one. Please run it on every AI generated adaptation before it reaches a learner. AI errors carry higher risk in SEND and EAL contexts than in general teaching contexts. The stakes are different, so let's go through the 4 categories. SEND accuracy checks. Have I preserved the cognitive retrieval demand, or has AI just made the task easier? Does the adaptation match the specific SEND need, not a generic lower ability reduction? Have I checked this against the learner's EHCP targets with my SENCO? Is the format genuinely accessible, or does it introduce new barriers? Then the EAL accuracy checks. Does the vocabulary retrieval task use appropriate target words for the subject and level? Are the English definitions simple enough for this learner's proficiency level? Is the task testing content knowledge, or has it become a language test by accident? Are the examples and context culturally inclusive? Then factual accuracy, which is applicable to all contexts. Is every fact, date, name, and definition verifiable? Have I worked through the retrieval questions myself to confirm the answers are correct? Does the success criteria match the specification requirements? And has anyone else reviewed this before it's used? These are red flags, so please reject the output if AI has simplified the task so much it no longer requires genuine retrieval. The adaptation uses deficit language or labels the learner needs negatively. AI has introduced incorrect information, or the output provides generic advice, give extra time rather than genuine task adaptation. I want to be specific about the last red flag. Generic advice is not adaptation. Give this student extra time is a reasonable adjustment, but it is not a retrieval task adaptation. What we're looking for is a task that is redesigned in its structure, its format, or its language demands, not one that simply allocates more time for the same inaccessible task. So here are some key takeaways for you. 1. Retrieval practice benefits SEND and EAL learners, but only when the format is adapted to remove the right barriers. The what stays, but the how must change. Never reduce cognitive retrieval demand, only format and language barriers. 2. AI can save significant time in generating multi-format adaptations, vocabulary scaffolds, and tiered question sets, but it has no knowledge of your specific learners. Your professional judgment, your SENCO, and your TAs are irreplaceable. AI is the drafter, they are the experts. 3. 6 copy-ready prompts. Use them as starting drafts. Review every output before use. Verify against your EHCP knowledge, your curriculum, and your professional understanding of each learner. 4. Ethical use here is non-negotiable and more critical than in general AI use. EHCP first, SENCO second, TA third, AI fourth. Never input identifiable learner data. Always be transparent with colleagues about AI involvement in SEND planning. 5. You do not need to create individual resources for every learner. Multi-format design and tiered tasks give all learners access to the same retrieval task through different entry points. That is not lowering expectations, that is raising access. So there are 3 challenges before I close. Pick one or even try all 3. Challenge 1 is audit one existing starter retrieval task. Take one retrieval starter you currently use with a class that includes SEND or EAL learners. Ask honestly, does this task unintentionally exclude any learner? Is there a format barrier that has nothing to do with knowledge? If yes, use prompt 2 to create a multi-format version for the week. Challenge 2. Try prompt 4 or 5. Use the tiered retrieval prompt or the vocabulary and the sentence frames prompt for your next unit. But here's the important part. Before you use it in the classroom, review the output with your SENCO or EAL coordinator. That conversation will be as valuable as the resource itself. Challenge 3. Share or talk about this episode with one colleague, a SENCO or an EAL coordinator, a form tutor or a teaching assistant. The conversation it starts will be more valuable than any single adapted worksheet. These conversations are how practice changes at a departmental and a school level. So the mantra for this episode: AI drafts the resource. Your knowledge of your learners makes it work for them. Thank you for watching. So this was episode 14 of the CPD series Next Generation Teaching, with each episode built around the evidence and the practice that moves teaching forward. The next episode is about using AI to support in producing personalised retrieval pathways. So if you found this video useful, please click the like button, subscribe and click on notifications for future videos. And if you do have any comments or questions, please leave them in the comments section. I look forward to seeing you on our next video.